Thank you, Minister. On that optimistic note, we conclude the debate on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill at Stage 3. It's now time to move on to the next item of business. And the next item of business is the debate on motion 20419 in the name of Gillian Martin on a motion on legislative consent for the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, UK legislation. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Gillian Martin to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to open this debate today on the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, which was introduced to the UK Parliament on the 10th of September last year. I will refer to this as the BBNJ Bill from now on, and I promise that's the only acronym that I'll use in these remarks. The BBNJ Bill implements the BBNJ Agreement, a landmark international treaty that seeks to protect marine biodiversity and was agreed under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The agreement relates to marine areas that lie beyond the jurisdiction of nations, otherwise known as the high seas, accounting for 2/3 of our world's oceans. To meet the obligations under this agreement, the BBNJ Bill introduces measures to ensure UK law accounts for the conservation and sustainable management of the high seas. The agreement enters into force this weekend, passing the thresholds for ratifications, and the decision-making body for the agreement, known as the Conference of Parties, is due to meet for the first time later this year. Ultimately, this has been the driving force for the timelines that we have been looking to work to. The Scottish Government supports the aims of this important agreement, and we've been working hard with the UK Government over the past few months to ensure that UK legislation is fit for purpose. The bill contains a number of provisions that fall within the devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament, and it's these provisions which bring us to the Chamber today. Specifically, the bill provides for three key things. Firstly, the sustainable management of marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Secondly, for area-based management tools, such as protecting specific areas in the high seas. And thirdly, to ensure marine licensing takes account of activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction in a way that considers environmental impacts. While this Government is very supportive of the aims of this international agreement and committed to constructive partnership working with UK Government on implementing it, the journey to the motion for legislative consent that we are discussing today has not been straightforward and has at times been deeply frustrating. This is for two primary reasons. There was a rushed timeline and the need to address devolution matters after the introduction of the bill, not before. I'll take a moment to set out these challenges, as I think it's important for this Parliament to be aware of them. The bill has been progressing through the UK Parliament on a compressed timeline in order to meet the UK's deadline to ratify the BBNJ agreement, enabling the UK to participate in the first Conference of Parties. And I want to be clear that the Scottish Government has had no control over this. That timeline has exacerbated the challenges that we've faced in ensuring that the bill respects the powers of this Parliament. It's hugely regrettable that the first draft of the bill, which was only shared with us shortly before introduction, did not account for devolution. And while we secured some changes prior to the introduction, intensive and multiple negotiations were required alongside the consideration of the bill both here and at Westminster. Addressing devolution in this way is far from ideal, and all too often it's become normal working practice for successive UK governments. I know it causes frustration for members, especially for the committees that are charged with detailed scrutiny of the legislation. However, I can assure members that I have pressed these points with the UK Government at every step. And final agreement was reached just before the new year, securing the protections for devolution that are necessary for me to be in a position to recommend the bill to members today. And I informed the NZEC committee as soon as I possibly could on Hogmanay. These measures are set out in our most recent legislative consent memorandum. And while the legislative consent process for the bill has been impacted by the factors that I've set out and has been hugely challenging, we've now been successful in securing measures that respect devolution. So in closing, I think it's important to emphasise what this bill will do and why it's necessary. It will protect our shared global environment and will do so in a way that involves multilateral working as partners and cooperators with fellow nations, at a time when both these things are under increasing threat and need the support of this Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call Edward Mountain, around 4 minutes. Mr Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It seems to be becoming a bit of a bad habit for me to deliver an ill-tempered speech about LCMs. Last time I referred to a sense of déjà vu in my remarks because we had been here too often before. Well, today it's déjà vu of déjà vu or déjà vu all over again. The Biodiversity Beyond National Boundaries Bill implements an international treaty about the high seas marine areas beyond the 200-mile limit. It commits signatories to more sustainable use and protection. And let me remind the Parliament that the treaty was signed in 2023. It took 2 years to introduce the bill, and now there seems to be an unseemly race to get it over the finish line this month, apparently to meet telegraphed international obligations. The Scottish Government lodged a memorandum 2 weeks after the bill's introduction. As is often the way these days, it could be called a holding LCM. It did not set out a substantive position, except in a minority of cases. The triggering provisions relate to new powers for the UK Secretary of State, which potentially intrude into Scottish marine management. You might ask how a treaty about extraterritorial waters could trigger devolution issues, and the main answer we got was about the potential impact on the Scottish marine-based actors. Not underwater thespians, I hasten to add, but the fishing and offshore energy industries and the like. By late October, there was still no update, so we wrote to the Scottish Government and got a reply on the 7th of November. And that said the government discussions were ongoing, but provided no further substantive detail. We tried again later that month, but the reply was no more illuminating. With the clock running down, we had the Cabinet Secretary in to give evidence on the 9th of December. And the committee found it slightly peculiar evidence session. On the one hand, the Scottish Government's main line continued to be they could not show their hand while they were still in negotiations with the UK Government. On the other hand, the Cabinet Secretary and officials were perfectly happy at times to delve into the detail about what outcomes they wanted in respect of this or that clause. As the committee said in our report, in a context where these holding LCMs are becoming increasingly the norm, there is no good reason for the Scottish Government to be coy about the main ask from the UK Government and to be inconsistent in sharing them. These should be a matter of the public record. For the Scottish Government, the story of this bill, it seems to have had a happy ending, that they have the amendments they wanted and now can recommend consent. And I put on record that it was just too late for our deliberations, and the committee is not able to express an informed view on these late provisions. Presiding Officer, asking the Parliament to agree something without any real chance to reflect on it totally devalues the principles of legislative consent. There may be rare occasions when this is unavoidable, but it now seems to happen, it now seems to happen more often than that to the committee, and the system feels dysfunctional, if not broken. Presiding Officer, will I get any time back? Okay, I'm happy to give way to my fellow committee member.
I asked my committee convener a more general question. He used the expression déjà vu in relation to these matters. I would agree with my convener on the basis that déjà vu there's a flaw in the LCM process, which is not for the Scottish Government's making. It has to be resolved, but in resolving that, this Parliament has to be a key party to those reforms, not just the Scottish and UK governments. Would my convener agree?
I would seldomly disagree with my fellow committee member on this, and I'm going to come on with a suggestion on why I think this needs to be resolved. Because, Presiding Officer, I've criticised the Scottish Government's secrecy, but I do accept that the legislative consent process often gives it a difficult hand to play. I know from a constructive conversation that we had with the Minister of Parliamentary Business, who agrees that things really must change. What we most need is a rule or a convention that a late triggering amendment stops the legislative clock at Westminster just long enough for the relevant committee here to take stock and gather some evidence on what we're being asked to do. If we are running out of time to sort this out in the parliamentary session, this parliamentary session, which I feel that we are, then, Presiding Officer, for goodness sake, let's, whoever is around in May, get working straight away with Westminster on finding a workable solution, because shortcutting the committee system in this Parliament does this Parliament and Westminster no favours. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. And I call Mercedes Villalba. Again, around 4 minutes. Ms Villalba.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Marine environmental and biodiversity protection is a worldwide challenge in which boundaries and borders have no relevance, which is why it's so important that the UK plays its part to protect biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction and honour its international commitments. This bill is a key part of these commitments, particularly in how it supports our duty of climate action. It's our obligation to other countries, to future generations, and to those feeling the effects of climate change in the here and now that we protect our oceans as a vital source of food, oxygen and carbon storage. This obligation is what prompted the United Kingdom to sign up to the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, and it's this obligation that makes the Labour government so committed to the agreement's objectives. As highlighted by the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, just 1% of waters beyond national jurisdictions are under environmental protection. This means our marine environment is particularly vulnerable to degradation due to pollution, unsustainable fishing practices and exploitation for profit. All countries have a right to fishing, shipping and research in marine areas beyond their national jurisdiction, which means that all countries have a responsibility to protect these areas. With this bill, the UK Labour government are stepping up to our responsibility. The bill will enable the UK to enforce compliance with area-based management tools in international waters. The most prominent of these tools is, of course, marine protected areas. However, this bill is ambitious in that it requires environmental impact assessments for activities which may impact marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. I'll give way to Edward Mountain.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the member for giving way. One of the questions that was asked at the committee is how this was going to be enforced, because if I remember rightly, there's about 30 countries that have signed up to it. There's a lot more countries around the world that haven't signed up to it. So is there any way you could allude to how enforcement will be carried out?
Mercedes Villalba.
Thank you. I think the member makes an important point, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep campaigning and encouraging as many member states as possible to sign up so that we can have that international working, which is what's needed because the ocean is common to us all. Members will be aware that I've repeatedly raised the impact of bottom trawling on marine environments in both the Chamber and with the Cabinet Secretary. This practice is damaging and destructive to both the marine environment and to marine life. Yet, as it is an efficient way to catch bottom-dwelling species such as cod, haddock and shrimp, it continues. Like a number of other issues I've raised in the Chamber, this practice continues despite being wildly destructive to the environment because it delivers vast profit for a few vested interests. By strictly regulating bottom trawling in areas beyond national jurisdictions, areas which, as I mentioned, are currently for the most part without any environmental protection, this will have a hugely positive impact on marine life and strengthen fish stocks within Scottish waters. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the cross-party consensus in support of this legislation is heartening and welcome. However, I do also take on board the comments from the Cabinet Secretary and the Chair of the Net Zero Committee regarding the need for intergovernment and parliamentary working, and would like to make clear my support for open and honest communication at all levels in the interests of democracy and accountability. But I do urge all members to support this LCM tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up.
Given some of the comments have been made about other signatories bill, I thought it might be useful just to say that there are 145 signatories to the BBNJ agreement, including the European Union and the United States. And so far, 81 parties have ratified the agreement. It includes Ireland, France, Denmark, Norway, Brazil and China. Many more are expected as well. And of course, the UK will be ratified on Saturday, the 17th of January. And I'd like to thank all contributions to this debate. In recommending consent for the relevant positions in this bill, I want to be clear that agreeing the motion is to agree to the effect of this bill and to Scotland playing its full part in implementing and managing it. And whilst we're not agreeing to what we're not agreeing to is this way of managing consent to UK bills. They can't be rushed like this. They can't be put together without thought to devolution. It wastes time, and we will never agree to a bill which actually tramples over devolution. I'm glad we've reached the resolution that we have, but it did hold things up. I understand the challenges involved for the UK Government in grappling with this complex bill within difficult timescales, and I'm fully committed to partnership working to make it effective. But I want to be clear that I remain frustrated that we've had to work like this. I share profound disappointment that our parliamentary committees have not at the appropriate time that they wanted to scrutinise the government's position across all clauses of the bill at once. And as I noticed it earlier, it was unavoidable the Scottish Government's part, given the UK Government's first draft of the bill was only shared with us shortly before introduction and did not account for devolution, and therefore there was a need for us to robustly defend devolution, not just on behalf of the Scottish Government, but on the part of Scotland as a nation and indeed this Parliament. And that results in the need to reach agreement in a staged way across all provisions, analysing complex clauses, engaging with the UK Government alongside the rapid passage of their bill. And I and my officials have been in regular contact with the relevant committees to assist the scrutiny as best we can. We've responded to questions, we've given evidence, proactively providing updates where we can, including my update over the festive recess to advise that the negotiations were over and that we had secured concurrent powers that we needed. We therefore provided as much information as we could, but we also reserved the right to have some private space for intergovernment negotiations, which were ongoing, constantly evolving. I do recognise that that has been a frustrating process for the committees involved, but I think it was important that we had that private government-to-government space to have those negotiations. So I want to put my thanks for the committee's careful consideration and their understanding these past 3 months. And I'd like to reassure the Chamber that I and my ministerial colleagues continue to raise these issues with the UK Government to press for better, earlier engagements on UK bills with devolved impacts. As to Edward Mitton's suggestions, I imagine that it is something that maybe the Standards Committee or the next Government might want to discuss more widely with the UK Government. Just how well that will go remains to be seen, because we have seen this happen quite a few times. But for now, I am proud we can be part of this important agreement for our world's oceans. It's an important step forward in the global effort to tackle the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, and in the shared international stewardship of our marine environment. Thank you.